How does domestic violence affect your divorce and custody case? So, you know, domestic violence allegations, charges, all that sort of category, whether you're accused or falsely accused or whatever might be going on, can definitely have some impact on things. It can affect your divorce case, it can affect your custody case. Getting divorced with kids, then your custody case, of course, is part of your divorce. But even if you were never married, there can be a custody dispute going on with legal custody, physical custody, parenting time, all these different sorts of things that get hammered out when people go separate ways and have kids together. It can definitely affect things. It can also affect a divorce case when there aren't kids. It can have an impact on things. It has to be dealt with the right way. You want to manage it properly. When you're talking about custody cases, whether within a divorce or just a custody case on its own and you're never married, there are these best interests of the child factors. So you can get into this thing where the two of you can't agree on what to do with custody, parenting time, the schedule, when you're going to have the child, when the mother is going to have the child. You can get in a situation where you don't agree on it, or if there's a no contact order or a domestic violence situation, maybe you can't even talk about it. So now you're in a place where you got to have the court decide things, whether it's temporarily or more long term. And they look at these 12 best interests of the child factors the way Michigan law does it, and a lot of states do it this way. They look at these best interests of the child factors. One of the 12 factors is domestic violence. So it's its own separate factor that it comes up that frequently, unfortunately. So it is its own factor, and it can definitely impact a decision by a court, whether it's temporary or permanent, whether you've been charged with domestic violence or pled guilty to it, or are convicted of it, or even just accused of it. That can all be the same category sometimes. So one strategy on this is to not plead guilty. I mean, the big mistake we see people make is they get talked into pleading guilty. They'll tell them, it's a first-time offense. You'll get probation and whatever. And basically they get sold out when they really maybe didn't even do anything, or it's pretty debatable what they did. They were in a fight. They were both causing trouble. And of course, men are way more likely to get charged with domestic violence than women, because they typically are the aggressor, but they're not always the aggressor. But it's normal that they get treated as such. That's very typical that happens. So you want to stay away from pleading guilty to something. I mean, that's a given. That's something that's in your control. With these situations with domestic violence and these charges and accusations and all these things, you want to try to control the stuff you can control. One thing you can control is not admit to anything. Don't talk to the police about it, and don't plead guilty. I mean, those are big mistakes that guys make in divorces or in custody cases or both. So you want to avoid that one. Hold off on all that stuff for a while. And then you go forward that way. But there's, how does it affect your divorce case or custody case? It can have a lot of practical sort of effects. If there's a domestic violence, even if you're just charged, you typically find that the local court, the district court here in Michigan, they'll issue a no contact order, even though you haven't been found guilty of anything. Now you can't have any contact with the other person. If there's children, it has a tendency to mean you can't really have contact with them either, or you have no way to set it up. You can't have your friend talk to your pal who talks to you. You can't use other people as intermediaries. You're not really able to do that. You need a lawyer. So you get a lawyer. Your lawyer can talk to the wife, the mother of your children. Your lawyer can talk to her lawyer if she has one. Work out parenting time, work out custody, but it can definitely get in the way at the beginning. It really can trip people up, so you got to handle it the right way, because if you're in a no contact order kind of situation, obviously you can't even talk to each other, not even about the kids. Some courts will put that it's okay to discuss things about the children only. Other than that, there should be no contact, but that doesn't seem to happen as much anymore. I used to see that 15 years ago. I'm not seeing that as much anymore on personal protection orders, on no contact orders, domestic violence charges, domestic violence accusations, those situations. It really quickly turns into like a no contact, like you're just not allowed to talk about anything with each other, and that can get in the way. It can also have some practical effects on you've been removed from your house, with no discussion and no forewarning. Now you're not allowed to be there. I met with somebody this week who they didn't even let him take his cell phone when the police removed him, and he eventually was found not guilty. Like the guy, he didn't do anything, but he was accused of doing something, and so he was treated like a criminal, thrown out of his own home, couldn't take anything with him. And a few months later, he still hadn't really been able to get much stuff out of this house yet. It can be very frustrating. So you want to handle it, but he didn't have an attorney through that whole time. So you want to have an attorney handle it when you can, get proper advice, at least meet with a lawyer, even if you're not going to hire one. you want to know where you stand, what your rights are, because mistakes get made that have really become hard to change later. But you know, in general, this world of domestic violence can have an impact on things. It can have an impact on your divorce case. You know, Michigan's a no-fault state, so in theory, the reasons for the divorce are not relevant. So then why you're getting divorced really shouldn't be a factor, but it still is. If there's a domestic violence charge, that's one thing. If you pled guilty to something, that's a whole other deal. It kind of colors the picture of things when you're trying to settle your divorce case and trying to work out agreements and trying to figure stuff out. Now you look like you're just the bad guy, you're the problem, and you want to avoid that role. You don't want to get labeled like that. So, your strategy would be to get good advice about it in the first place, avoid pleading guilty, and avoid some of this other nonsense.